Hi, welcome to the Quakes Motel. My name's Conan. In today's video, we're going to look at an age-old trick that mixing and mastering engineers have been using for years, referencing. It might sound like an obvious thing to say, but it's actually a bit of a neglected practice, and it can really help you nail your mixes, whether you're in a bad environment, whether you're on headphones, or even if you're in a really good environment that's acoustically treated. What better way to get your mixes right than to play them alongside your favourite tracks or the best Grammy award-winning songs ever? Let's jump in. Now this is going to be a bit of a talky one, so bear with me, but I think the rewards are worth it in the end. In a DAW, it's a lot easier to reference. There's multiple plugins that do it. I use a plugin called Adapter Metric AB. I use that when I'm mastering and mixing for clients. Makes it very easy to reference between the track that I'm mixing or mastering, some references the client may have sent me, and to reference the original against how I'm progressing in the actual mix or the master. The way that I might use referencing is to get the low end right, the mid-range right, the high end right, and I will reference against certain tracks that I have in my reference folder, and it'll give me an idea that there'll be tracks that I know sound good of years and years of listening to music. Not just whole tracks, there'll be tracks where I like the sound of a guitar, or I like the way a vocal sits, a female vocal, I like the stereo field, and I have folders built up over years that I will reach for if I'm working on a particular track, whether it be a master or a mix. There's no point in me telling you what my reference tracks are because it's a very subjective thing. It's something that you build up over years, so it would be pointless. But let's say, for example, I was working on a house track, a disco house track. I would reach for something like Daft Punk Around the World because years, 20+ years of playing that track in clubs, I know that it sounds good on bad systems, good systems, restaurants, cars, etc. So I'll use that as a reference track, and I'll reference against the low end, the mid-range, the highs, etc. You don't have to like the reference tracks that you're using. They don't have to be your favourite song. In fact, in some ways, it's very easy to build up a folder full of reference tracks that you love yourself, but they're not actually particularly good reference tracks. So try and be objective about it. But of course, there's nothing wrong with having some of your favourite tracks in there if you know that they sound good and if they're good reference tracks. But using other people's tracks as a reference is not the only way that you can use referencing. An old trick that mixing and mastering engineers have also been using for years is to give you an idea. We call it the before and after technique. Basically, let's say you're mixing a track, you'll get a rough balance of that track, you will bounce a rough mix, and then you'll reference against that. Now that can be really good positively because you can flick between the rough mix and you can hear how far you've got and you can think, oh wow, it sounds so good. But also it's very easy, as I'm sure you all know, to go down a rabbit hole, apply loads of plugins, you go back to the original rough mix and you think the rough mix sounds better. So it's a really good reference to keep yourself grounded, as well as a positive reference to go back to and think I've come a long way in the mix. So how do we do it on the MPC? It's not quite as easy as in your DAW, and there's a few little tweaks that you have to make and little workarounds, and it's not quite as easy to A and B in the same way. I wish it was, but it isn't at the moment. I'm sure there's more than one way to do this, absolutely certain of it. There always is in the MPC, but I'm going to run through the way that I do it, and maybe you can tweak it to fit how you work, or maybe you'll use it exactly the same, or maybe you just won't use any of the techniques that I use at all. But this is the technique that I use, which I found seems to be the easiest. So let's say, for instance, you've got your track made up. It's all MIDI. It doesn't have to be all MIDI, but let's just say it's all MIDI in this case. You've got a whole track built up. For this example, I've just got a drum beat, but let's pretend that it's an entire track. So I've got that in my MIDI. So I have a folder on my SD card, which is my reference folder. In there will be my references for whole tracks, for kick drums, for bass, for mids, for highs, vocals, etc. And let's say for this instance, I'm mixing down my track, so I want a reference track. So a whole track that's already mastered and mixed by some geniuses in the studio. It might be a Grammy Award winning track, but I love it and I love the sound of it and I want my track to sound like this. So the process that I'll go through is I will go into Browse, I will find the track in the folder, I will load it, come back out again, and then in the audio track I will load the track in. So you go into audio, you go into edit audio, make sure that you're not on this one here, because when you are, you can't use browse sample. So any of the other ones, you can go to browse samples, you go into browse samples, you pick the audio track, make sure that it's where you want it to be. So let's say it's right at the start, press do it, and now you have that audio track in place to reference. So as things stand, I've got my whole track as MIDI or however it might be. I have my audio track, which is going to be my reference track. And then what I will do is I will go into the mix section. I will go into the submixes. So what I want to do is I want to send my programs, however many there may be or whatever. You'll go into route and you will route your programs to sub 1 or sub 2, 3, 4. You've got 8 subs. You choose which one you want to do. So you'll basically send all of your tracks, your programs, etc. to sub 1, because that will be the mix that you'll want to listen to when you're A-ing rather than B-ing. B-ing would be the reference, A-ing would be your track. Then the audio track, if you just go back from 1, it's Maya Rolls here, that's the name of the track, and I will send that to sub 2. So you'll be in your route and you'll send it to sub 2. Okay, simple as that. Then I will go to my submix section, and let's say for submix 1, which is the track which I'm working on, in your inserts you put in kill EQ. Submix 2, which is my reference track, kill EQ. And I'll explain why in a second. Really simple, really, to be honest. So at the moment I've got my whole track that I'm working on all going to submix 1 with kill EQ, and the track that I'm using as my reference track, or multiple tracks, because you've got 8 subs here, and you know, you can, in fact, you don't even have to send them to individual subs. You could send them all to sub 2 and just mute them and switch between them. It's that easy. So I've got my reference track on sub 2. Now what I can do now from this situation, because when you're referencing tracks, you don't necessarily, it can be overwhelming if you're referencing a track and you've got your track playing, the whole of your track playing, with all the mids, highs, lows, hi-hats, keyboards, vocals, everything going on, and you're referencing it against a track that's also got loads and stuff going on. Now the best way to mix, and not the best way, actually that's wrong, the way that I mix, and you know, I know other people mix like this as well, but from my experience of 35 plus years in the studio, I tend to mix like this. I don't tend to listen to the whole song as such. Initially I listen to it in frequency ranges, and that can be lows, low mids, mids, high mids, highs, and air right at the top sometimes, depending on the track. And so the reason why I've got kill EQ is because with kill EQ I can now split my reference and my track into 3 different sections. So in kill EQ, for instance, I've got the lows, which I've got up from 0 Hz up to 200 Hz. The mid section is going to be everything between where I've got this set to and where I've got this set to, which will be my highs. So mid range, that's that taken care of. Highs, you would set it here. So with highs, I would probably go for something closer to 4K, to be honest. So right now, I've got my lows, which is everything up to 200 Hz. I've got my mids, which is everything from 200 to 4K, and my highs 4K upwards. Then make sure in your other track you have the same settings. So 200, and we'll set that to 4K. There we go. So just to clarify, the track I'm working on is on submix 1. I've got air kill EQ set up with the different frequency ranges. The tracks I'm using for referencing are on submix 2, air kill, it's on there again, same frequency ranges. So now it literally is a matter of, this is the track that I'm working on. Let's say, pretend it's a whole track, it's just a drum beat, but pretend it's a whole track. So that track's playing away, and then I'll just literally mute that track and unmute that track. Now, that's not as easy as it is in a DAW, I can assure you. On the plugin that I use, you literally just hit one button. But you can see that you'd get pretty quick at it. You've got these submixes here, and you can flick between the different ones, the different tracks that you might have set up as references. That's probably why it's better to have, like, maybe, say, 3 or 4 different tracks set up on different submixes, because then you can flick in and out and compare them to your #1 track. So, the Air Kill EQ, let's just demonstrate that. So, I've got my track playing. And now I just want to concentrate on the lows. So I've got the track playing, the lows are playing. You might not be able to hear that unless you've actually let's go to the mids. So the mids are playing. Like I said, there's lots of changing around on screens, and let's just set this one up so the mids are playing on here. So now we've got the mids playing. So can you see where I'm coming from? You have, because you've got the Kill EQ set up on both channels or set up on all of your references, you can quite easily flick between them and choose which area you want to work on. And obviously you can change this as well. It doesn't have to be 200 Hz to 4K. It's just that they tend to be the ranges. If you've only got 3-band, I tend to use a 5-band when I'm working in DAW, so I can split it up a lot more. But that's absolutely fine. I worked on a 3-band for absolutely years and did the same thing when referencing up to 200 Hz. Maybe you could probably take that down to 125, depends on your genre. If you're working on some real bass heavy stuff and you really want to focus in on the low end, then have it down to 125, 120, 110. And maybe you can bring that down. If you're working on lo-fi stuff, and you're not really going to have much above 12K, you can probably bring that down. But it depends on the track. So don't copy my numbers. But as a reference point, as a starting point, 200 down to maybe 120 is good for the lows, and 4K upwards, say 3K upwards, is a good place to start. So that's how I would have it set up if I was doing, if I was referencing between my track and the other tracks and stuff. Now, so the other thing that I was talking about was not just referencing against your track, referencing against other people's material. It's taking your track and doing a rough mix and referencing against that. So that's pretty simple as well. So we've got our track here. Here it is. This is my whole track. And if you go into sequence, you can bounce to sample. So if you hit bounce to sample, come back out again. Now we want to go to a different audio track. Let's just say you only have one audio track. If you hit that plus button there, it will give you another audio track. Go into edit audio again, and this time when you browse samples, you want to put your rough mix in. So you put your rough mix in, make sure it's in the right place. I don't know why it does that sometimes. So press do it. Now I've got my rough mix, and I have sent that to sub 3. If you remember, if you go into here, go into your audio tracks, there's my rough mix. I've sent it to sub 3. Don't know why that's on there. That doesn't actually need to be on there. And then go back to my subs again. And here we go. This is my rough mix. I have Air Kill EQ set up on it again. So now I can switch between the track that I'm working on, which is on submix 1, and I can reference my track, my rough mix, as I'm going along to see how far I've got, whether it be positive or whether it be negative. Very, very simple. You can see now why I use audio tracks, because the thing is, if you're referencing against something with a MIDI, like some people have said to me, why don't you bounce it to a pad? The thing is with a pad is you have to trigger the pad. So if you're halfway through your track and you want to reference, then you're going to have to trigger that pad halfway through. That could actually have some benefits thinking about it, because you could just have it assigned to a pad and just hit that pad and listen to it. But just my personal way of doing it, I prefer to have it on an audio track, and I can shift that around anywhere I want in the song that I'm referencing against. So there you have it, a quick and easy way to set up a referencing tool in your MPC. You've got no excuse not to use it. I stress to all of my students how important referencing is when you're mastering and mixing. It really is a much easier way to not be overwhelmed when you're mixing and mastering, and to get something in the ballpark very, very quickly. But one thing I will say, actually, there's a couple of things I want to say. Firstly, regarding the rough mix, when you bounce your rough mix, make sure that it's at a pretty decent level. You know, -6, -3 dB is good, and then make sure that the track you're referencing and the track that you're working on, you want to get them at the same levels. Don't be fooled by the louder is better. So watch that, make sure that they're of similar levels, because it's very, very easy to get fooled. One of the benefits of working in a DAW with the particular plugin that I use is that it automatically does that for you. So in the MPC you have to actually do that yourself, but we're all used to doing that in the MPC because it doesn't have auto gain, so you're going to be used to it anyway. The other thing is, and this comes from years of experience, is when you're referencing other people's material, remember these guys are top mastering engineers, top mixing engineers. They've been doing it for a long time. They might have some of the best equipment in the world. They might have won Grammys. So you're comparing yourself against them. Try not to think of it as a comparison in terms of am I as good as them. Don't go down that rabbit hole, because I've done it, and there's a fine balance between being objective and trying to get your mix to be in the right place to better the mix, and then driving yourself absolutely insane because your mix doesn't sound as good as the other person's mix. Firstly, we all know that good, best, etc. is subjective anyway. So try not to go down that rabbit hole and try not to get disheartened. Just think objectively about it, and use that as a reference. And it's literally like having the best teacher in the world in the room with you, because you've got their piece of music, you've got that artist's work of art. It sounds amazing, it's radio ready, you know how good it sounds, and you're going to be able to get your track to sound that good by referencing. Trust me, I know this from experience. It really is a really, really important tool. I can't stress it enough. And now you have, if you haven't already been doing it, a simple way to do it in your MPC. So thank you for watching. Please subscribe for more mixing, mastering and MPC tutorials and reviews. This is the Craig's Motel. My name's Conan. Till next time.